Hello all, and welcome back to Tangents on Cracked Spines. I have thought about calling you my bookworms. Don't know how I feel about it. Don't know how y'all feel about it. Please let me know, how do you feel about being called a bookworm? Anyways, if you're new here, I'm very glad, but maybe go back 2 episodes to start this story from the beginning. As a quick intro, I'm Frankie, and we'll be reading with unedited personal commentary on the classics or any story in the public domain. Listener discretion is advised, as some of the content holds adult themes, language, violence, the gambit. The classic works are not necessarily PG. And my own language isn't always the best. We are currently reading H.P. Wells' The Color Out of Space. This theoretically the last episode of this particular story. In the last 2, big old meteor landed in the gardener's place in a place called Arkham, because it's H.P. Lovecraft. Of course it's Arkham, or at least outside of Arkham. Scientists come by, they try to investigate it, but it evaporates. It taints the water. And everybody at first the foliage, and then the critters, the flora, the fauna, and then the humans, all succumb to various side effects from the meteor-tainted water, and it tends to include necrosis. The end of the last episode, all of the gardeners were dead one way or another. I'm sorry for anybody I just added an earworm. But, yeah, it was not pretty. They were creatures. They were no longer things of our world. Anyways, going back in. Let's see. Yeah, Amy's head completely... Not Amy's head. Nahum's head had completely caved in while he was speaking. Amy laid a red check tablecloth over what was left and reeled out the back door into the fields. He climbed the slope to the 10-acre pasture and stumbled home by the north road and the woods. He could not pass that well from which his horse had run away. He had looked at it through the window and had seen that no stone was missing from the rim. Then the lurching buggy had not dislodged anything after all. The splash had been something else. Something which went into the well after it had done with poor Nahum. When Amy reached his house, the horse and buggy had arrived before him and thrown his wife into fits of anxiety. But at least when, horse and buggy go awry, they do make their way home. A car goes awry and, well, it's stuck there till you fix it. I mean, if you hurt a horse, it's stuck there too. And it's significantly sadder. But that's beside the point. Dum dum dum. Reassuring her without explanations, probably a good idea, he set out at once for Arkham and notified the authorities that the Gardner family was no more. He indulged in no details, but merely told of the deaths of Nahum and Nabby, that of Thaddeus being already known, and mentioned that the cause seemed to be the same strange ailment which had killed the livestock. He also stated that Merwin and Zenas had disappeared. Yeah, that's one way to put it. There was considerable questioning at the police station, and in the end, Amy was compelled to take 3 officers to the Gardner farm. Poor Amy. Together with the coroner, the medical examiner, and the veterinary who had treated the diseased animals. I was wondering how the veterinarian got in on this part. He went much against his will. Fair. For the afternoon was advancing, and he feared the fall of night over that accursed place. But it was some comfort to have so many people with him. Fair. Very fair. The 6 men drove out in a Democrat wagon, following Amy's buggy, and arrived at the pest-ridden farmhouse about 4 o'clock. Alright. I need to see what, in particular, a Democrat wagon is. Pausing! Alrighty, so, for y'all's information, a Democrat wagon is a flatbed wagon with generally 2 or more seats pulled by, generally at least 2 horses. Pretty much picture any old-timey movie or Western movie, what the guy has on the farm and goes into town to get supplies with. Called a Democrat buggy because it was inexpensive and fairly well available. Used as the officers were to gruesome experiences, not one remained unmoved at what was found in the attic and under the red check tablecloth on the floor below. Yeah? At least they don't see that flesh animated and trying to talk to them or eat them. The whole aspect of the farm with its gray desolation was terrible enough, but those 2 crumbling objects were beyond all bounds. No one could look long at them, and even the medical examiner admitted that there was very little to examine. Yeah, I imagine that, the medical examiner for the time frame was just like, yep, they're dead. Good enough for me. I think this is the priest's domain now. 'Cause, I don't think they were calling it a murder. Specimens could be analyzed, of course, so he busied himself in obtaining them. Oh, poor man. And here it develops that a very puzzling aftermath occurred at the college laboratory, where the 2 vials of dust were finally taken. That's one way to get cremated? Under the spectroscope, both samples gave off an unknown spectrum, in which many of the baffling bands were precisely like those which the strange meteor had yielded in the previous year. Who is surprised? The property of emitting this spectrum vanished in a month, and just thereafter consisted mainly of alkaline phosphates and carbonates. Because that's mostly what we are made out of. Amy would not have told the men about the well if he had thought they meant to do anything then and there. It was getting towards sunset and he was anxious to be away. But he could not help glancing nervously at the stony curb by the great sweep. And when a detective questioned him, he admitted that Nahum had feared something down there. So much so that he had never even thought of searching it for Merwin or Zenas. After that, nothing would do. After that, nothing would do but that they empty and explore the well immediately. Not in the dark, you don't. So Amy had to wait, trembling, while pail after pail of rank water was hauled up and splashed on the soaking ground outside. Ugh. That's just terrible. For a multitude of reasons. Without being like, yeah, there's a thing in there. Just, ugh. And I truly am sorry, but like, punctuation! I'm okay with, there being a weird, to our standard, meter. I grew up reading older books. But punctuation, please. The men sniffed in disgust at the fluid, and toward the last held their noses against the fodder they were uncovering. Yeah? It was not so long a job as they feared it would be, since the water was phenomenally low. Ooh. There is no need to speak too exactly of what they found. Merwin and Zenith were both there, in part, though the vestiges were mainly skeletal. There were also a small deer and a large dog in about the same state. Oh, that's where the dog went. And a number of bones of smaller animals. The ooze and slime at the bottom seemed inexplicably porous and bubbling, and a man who descended on handholds with a long pole found that he could sink the wooden shaft to any depth in the mud of the floor without meeting any solid obstruction. Twilight had now fallen, and lanterns were brought from the house. Then, when it was seen that nothing further could be gained from the well, everyone went indoors and conferred in the ancient sitting room, while the intermittent light of a spectral half-moon played wanly on the gray desolation outside. We're just gonna casually sit in the parlor of the people we came here to inspect and confirm their deaths, where 2 of the kids were out in the well, and the parents were literal piles of dust inside. Yeah, that makes sense. After dark, no less. Sorry, if I don't keep up with the reading and stop with the snarkiness, we might wind up having 4 episodes of this. The men were frankly nonplussed by the entire case, and could find no convincing common element to link the strange vegetable conditions, the unknown disease of livestock and humans, and the unaccountable deaths of Merwin and Zanus in the tainted well. They had heard the common country talk, it is true, but could not believe that anything contrary to natural law had occurred. No doubt the meteor had poisoned the soil, but the illness of persons and animals who had eaten nothing grown in that soil was another matter. Was it the well water? Very possibly. It might be a good idea to analyze it. But what peculiar madness could have made both boys jump into the well? Any number of poisonings that addled their brains? Their deeds were so similar, and the fragments showed that they had both suffered from the gray and brittle death. Why was everything so gray and brittle? It was the coroner, seated near a window overlooking the yard, who first noticed the glow about the well. Night had fully set in, and all the abhorrent grounds seemed faintly luminous with more than the fitful moonbeams. But this new glow was something definite and distinct, and appeared to shoot up from the black pit like a softened ray from a searchlight, giving dull reflections in the little ground pools where the water had been emptied. It had a very queer color, and as all the men clustered round the window, Amy gave a violent start, for this strange beam of ghastly miasma was to him of no unfamiliar hue. He had seen that color before, and feared to think what it might mean. He had seen it in the nasty brittle globule in that aerolite 2 summers ago, had seen it in the crazy vegetation of the springtime, and had thought he had seen it for an instant that very morning against the small barred window of that terrible attic room where nameless things had happened. It had flashed there for a second, and a clammy and hateful current of vapor had brushed past him. And then poor Nahum had been taken by something of that color. He had said so at the last, said it was the globule in the plants. After that had come the runaway in the yard, and the splash in the well. And now that well was belching forth to the night a pale, insidious beam of the same demonic tint. It does credit to the alertness of Amy's mind that he puzzled even at that tense moment over a point which was essentially scientific. He could not but wonder at his gleaning of the same impression from a vapor glimpsed in the daytime against a window opening on the morning sky, and from a nocturnal exhalation seen as a phosphorescent mist against the black and blasted landscape. It wasn't right. It was against nature. And he thought of those terrible last words of his stricken friend. It come from some place where things ain't as they is here. One of them professors said so. All 3 horses outside, tied to a pair of shriveled saplings by the road, were now neighing and pawing frantically. The wagon driver started for the door to do something, but Amy laid a shaky hand on his shoulder. "Don't go out there," he whispered. "There's more to this nor what we know. Nahum said something lived in the well that sucks your life out. He said it must be summit growed from a round ball like one we seen in the meteor stone that fell a year ago June. Sucks and burns, he said, and is just a cloud of color like that light out there now, that ye can hardly see and can't tell what it is. Nahum thought it feeds on everything living and gets stronger all the time. He said he seen it this last week. He must be something from away off in the sky like the men from the college last year says the meteor stone was. The way it's made and the way it works ain't like no way of God's world. It's some from beyond." Now, that particular linguistics is the way it was written. That wasn't me making him sound uneducated on purpose. So the men paused indecisively as the light from the well grew stronger, and the hitched horses pawed and whinnied in increasing frenzy. It was truly an awful moment, with terror in that ancient and accursed house itself, 4 monstrous seats of fragments, 2 from the house and 2 from the well, in the woodshed behind, and that shaft of unknown and unholy iridescence from the slimy depths in front. Amy had restrained the driver on impulse, forgetting how unhinged he himself was after the clammy brushing of that colored vapor in the attic room. But perhaps it is just as well that he acted as he did. No one will ever know what was abroad that night, and though the blasphemy from beyond had not so far hurt any human of unweakened mind, there is no telling what it might have done at that last moment, and with its seemingly increased strength and the special signs of purpose it was soon to display beneath the half-clouded moonlit sky. All at once, one of the detectives at the window gave a short, sharp gasp. The others looked at him, and then quickly followed his own gaze upward to the point at which its idle strain had been suddenly arrested. There was no need for words. What had been disputed in country gossip was disputable no longer, and it is because of the thing which every man of that party agreed in whispering later on that the strange days are never talked about in Arkham. It is necessary to premise that there was no wind at that hour of the evening. One did arise not long afterward, but there was absolutely none then. Even the dry tips of the lingering hedge mustard, gray and blighted, and the fringe on the roof of the standing Democrat wagon were unstirred. And yet, amid that tense, godless calm, the high bare boughs of all the trees in the yard were moving. They were twitching morbidly and spasmodically, clawing in convulsive and epileptic madness at the moonlit clouds, scratching impotently in the noxious air as if jerked by some alien and bodiless line of linkage with subterranean horrors, writhing and struggling below the black roots. Not a man breathed for several seconds. Then a cloud of darker depth passed over the moon, and the silhouette of clutching branches faded out momentarily. At this there was a general cry, muffled with awe, but husky and almost identical from every throat. For the terror had not faded with the silhouette, and in a fearsome instant of deeper darkness, the watcher saw, wriggling at that treetop height, 1,000 tiny points of faint and unhallowed radiance, tipping each bow like the fire of St. Elmo or the flames that came down on the apostles' head at Pentecost. I'm not Catholic. I'm afraid I don't know who St. Elmo is. But I'm blasphemous and just picturing Elmo drawn as an icon. I'm a terrible person. It was a monstrous constellation of unnatural light, like a glutted swarm of corpse-fed fireflies dancing hellish sarabans over an accursed marsh, and its color was that same nameless intrusion which Amy had come to recognize and dread. All the while the shaft of phosphorescence from the well was getting brighter and brighter, bringing to the minds of the huddled men a sense of doom and abnormality which far outtraced any image their conscious minds could form. It was no longer shining out. It was pouring out. And as the shapeless stream of unplaceable color left the well, it seemed to flow directly into the sky. The veterinary shivered and walked to the front door to drop the heavy extra bar across it. Ah, yes, because, barring the door will keep a shapeless light from coming in. Amy shook no less and had to tug and point for lack of a controllable voice when he wished to draw notice to the growing luminosity of the trees. The neighing and stamping of the horses had become utterly frightful, but not a soul of that group in the old house would have ventured forth for any earthly reward. Fair, but poor horses. With the moments, the shining of the trees increased, while their restless branches seemed to strain more and more toward verticality. The wood of the well sweep was shining now, and presently a policeman dumbly pointed to some wooden sheds and beehives near the stone wall on the west. They were commencing to shine too, though the tethered vehicles of the visitors seemed so far unaffected. Then there was a wild commotion and clopping in the road, and as Amy quenched the lamp for better seeing, they realized that the span of frantic grays had broke their sapling and run off with the Democrat wagon. Well, if they wanted to make a run for it, they're kind of crap out of luck now. The shock served to loosen several tongues, then embarrassed whispers were exchanged. "It spreads on everything organic that's been around here," muttered the medical examiner. No one replied, but the man who had been in the well gave a hint that his long pole must have stirred up something intangible. "It was awful," he added. "There was no bottom at all. Just ooze and bubbles and the feeling of something lurking under there. Amy's horse still pawed and screamed deafeningly in the road outside, and nearly drowned its owner's faint quaver as he mumbled his formless reflections. It came from that stone. It growed down there. It got everything living. It fed itself on 'em, mind and body. Thad and Murney, Zanus and Nabby, Nahum was the last. They all drunk the water. It got strong on 'em. It came from beyond, where things ain't like they be here. Now it's going home. At this point, as the column of unknown color flared suddenly stronger and began to weave itself into fantastic suggestions of shape, which each spectator later described differently, there came from poor tethered hero such a sound as no man before or since ever heard from a horse. Every person in that low-pitched sitting room stopped his ears, and Amy turned away from the window in horror and nausea. Words could not convey it. When Amy looked out again, the hapless beast lay huddled, inert, on the moonlit ground between the splintered shafts of the buggy. That was the last of Hero till they buried him the next day. Poor Hero! I mean, Amy didn't want to come back. The police said he had to. And Hero paid the price. But the present was no time to mourn, for almost at this instant, a detective silently called attention to something terrible in the very room with them. In the absence of the lamplight, it was clear that a faint phosphorescence had begun to pervade the entire apartment. It glowed on the broad-planked floor and the fragment of rag carpet, and shimmered over the sashes of the small-paned windows. I told you that, barring the doors wasn't going to keep light from entering. It ran up and down the exposed corner posts, coruscated about the shelf and mantel, and infected the very doors and furniture. Each minute saw it strengthen, and at last it was very plain that healthy living things must leave that house. Amy showed them the back door and the path up through the fields to the 10-acre pasture. They walked and stumbled as in a dream, and did not dare look back till they were far away on the high ground. Insert Star Wars meme. They were glad of the path, for they could not have gone the front way, by that well. It was bad enough passing the glowing barn and sheds, and those shining orchard trees with their gnarled, fiendish contours. But thank heaven the branches did their worst twisting up. The moon went under some very black clouds as they crossed the rustic bridge over Chapman's Brook, and it was blind groping from there to the open meadows. When they looked back toward the valley and the distant Gardner place at the bottom, they saw a fearsome sight. All the farm was shining with a hideous unknown blend of color. Trees, buildings, and even such grass and herbage as had not been wholly changed to lethal gray brittleness. The boughs were all straining skyward, tipped with tongues of foul flame and lambent ticklings of the same monstrous fire were creeping about the ridgepoles of the house, barn, and sheds. It was a scene from a vision of Fuseli, and over all the rest reigned that riot of luminous amorphousness. That alien and undiminished rainbow of cryptic poison from the well, seething, feeling, lapping, reaching, scintillating, straining, and maligningly bubbling in its cosmic and unrecognizable chromaticism. I don't think he added enough adjectives in there. Adverbs? Adjectives. I do know my grammar. I'm just not doing great. Then, without warning, the hideous thing shot vertically up toward the sky like a rocket or meteor, leaving behind no trail and disappearing through a round and curiously regular hole in the clouds before any man could gasp or cry out. No watcher can ever forget that sight, and Amy stared blankly at the stars of Cygnus, Deneb twinkling above the others, where the unknown color had melted into the Milky Way. But his gaze was the next moment called swiftly to the earth by the crackling in the valley. It was just that, only a wooden ripping and crackling, and not an explosion, as so many others of the party vowed. Yet the outcome was the same, for in one feverish, kaleidoscopic instant, there burst up from that doomed and accursed farm a gleamingly eruptive cataclysm of unnatural sparks and substance, blurring the glance of the few who saw it, and sending forth to the zenith a bombarding cloudburst of such colored and fantastic fragments as our universe must needs disown. Though quickly reclosing vapors, they followed the great morbidity that had vanished, and in another second they had vanished too. Behind and below was only a darkness to which the men dared not return, and all about was a mounting wind which seemed to sweep down in black. F-R-O-R-E. For gusts from interstellar space. It shrieked and howled and lashed the fields and distorted woods in a mad cosmic frenzy, till soon the trembling party realized it would be no use waiting for the moon to show what was left down there at Nahum's. Too awed even to hint theories, the 7 shaking men trudged back toward Arkham by the north road. Amy was worse than his fellows, and begged them to see him inside his own kitchen, instead of keeping straight on to town. He did not wish to cross the nighted, wind-whipped woods alone to his home on the main road, for he had had an added shock that the others were spared, and was crushed forever with a brooding fear he dared not even mention for many years to come. As the rest of the watchers on that tempestuous hill had stolidly set their faces toward the road, Amy had looked back an instant at that shadowed valley of desolation, so lately sheltering his ill-starred friend. And from that stricken, faraway spot, he had seen something feebly rise, only to sink down again upon the place from which the great, shapeless horror had shot into the sky. It was just a color, but not any color of our earth or heavens, and because Amy recognized that color, and knew that this last faint remnant must still lurk down there in the well, he has never been quite right since. Amy would never go near the place again. It is over half a century now since the horror happened, but he has never been there and will be glad when the new reservoir blots it out. Because he did not make the logical leap that this thing feeds on water. Let's give it more and feed the entire town with it. Sorry. I shall be glad too, for I do not like the way the sunlight changed color around the mouth of that abandoned well I passed. I hope the water will always be very deep, but even so, I shall never drink it. I do not think I shall visit the Arkham country hereafter. 3 of the men who had been with Amy returned the next morning to see the ruins by daylight. But there were not any real ruins, only the bricks of the chimney, the stones of the cellar, some mineral and metallic glitter here and there, and the rim of that nefandous well. There's no R in there. Nefandous. Not nefarious. Nefandous well. Save for Amy's dead horse, which they towed away and buried, and the buggy which they shortly returned to him, everything that had ever been living had gone. 5 eldritch acres of dusty, gray desert remained, nor has anything ever grown there since. To this day, it sprawls open to the sky like a great spot, eaten by acid in the woods and fields, and the few who have ever dared glimpse it, in spite of the rural tales, have named it the Blasted Heath. The rural tales are queer. They might be even queerer if city men and college chemists could be interested enough to analyze the water from that disused well, or the gray dust that no wind seems ever to disperse. Botanists, too, ought to study the stunned flora on the borders of that spot, for they might shed light on the country notion that the blight is spreading, little by little, perhaps an inch a year. People say the color of the neighboring herbage is not quite right in the spring, and that wild things leave queer prints in the light winter snow. Snow never seems quite so heavy on the Blasted Heath as it is elsewhere. Horses, the few that are left in this motor age, grow skittish in the Silent Valley, and hunters cannot depend on their dogs too near the splotch of grayish dust. They say the mental influences are very bad too. Numbers went queer in the years after Nahum's taking, and always they lacked the power to get away. What? Oh, okay. Then the stronger-minded folk all left the region, and only the foreigners tried to live in the crumbling old homesteads. They could not stay, though, and one sometimes wonders what insight beyond ours their wild, weird stories of whispered magic have given them. Is it me, or is he as bad about alliteration as Dr. Seuss sometimes? And that's what's making my tongue a little hard to follow. When he's describing something, lots of the same letter. Their dreams at night, they protest, are very horrible in that grotesque country, and surely the very look of the dark realm is enough to stir a morbid fancy. No traveler has ever escaped a sense of strangeness in those deep ravines, and artists shiver as they paint thick woods whose mystery is as much of the spirit as of the eye. I myself am curious about the sensation I derived from my one lone walk before Amy told me his tale. When twilight came, I had vaguely wished some clouds would gather, for an odd timidity about the sky, about the deep skyey voids above had crept into my soul. Do not ask me for my opinion. I do not know. That is all. There was no one but Amy to question, for Arkham people will not talk about the strange days. And all 3 professors who saw the aerolite and its colored globule are dead. That's convenient. There were other globules. Depend on that. One must have fed itself and escaped, and probably there was another which was too late. No doubt it is still down the well. I know there was something wrong with the sunlight I saw above that miasmal brink. The rustics say the blight creeps an inch a year, so perhaps there is a kind of growth or nourishment even now. But whatever demon hatchling is there, it must be tethered to something, or else it would quickly spread. Is it fastened to the roots of those trees that claw the air? One of the current Arkham tales is about fat oaks that shine and move as they ought not to do at night. What it is, only God knows. In terms of matter, I suppose the thing Amy described would be called a gas. But the gas obeyed laws that are not of our cosmos. This was no fruit of such worlds and suns as shine on the telescopes and photographic plates of our observatories. This was no breath from the skies whose motions and dimensions our astronomers measure or deem too vast to measure. It was just a color out of space. A frightful messenger from unformed realms of infinity beyond all nature as we know it. From realms whose mere existence stuns the brain and numbs us with the black extra-cosmic gulfs it throws open before our frenzied eyes. I doubt very much if Amy consciously lied to me, and I do not think his tale was all a freak of madness, as the townfolk had forewarned. Something terrible came to the hills and valleys on that meteor, and something terrible, though I know not in what proportion, still remains. I shall be glad to see the water come. Meanwhile, I hope nothing will happen to Amy. He saw so much of the thing, and its influence was so insidious. Why has he never been able to move away? How clearly he recalled those dying words of Nahum's. Can't get away. Draws ya. You know something's coming, but 'tain't no use. Amy is such a good old man. When the reservoir gang gets to work, I must write the chief engineer to keep a sharp watch on him. I would hate to think of him as the gray, twisted, brittle monstrosity which persists more and more in troubling my sleep. So yeah, don't drink the water in Arkham. That was The Color Out of Space. And in that last little bit, we heard the title of that short story. It's not a chapter book. It's not quite a novella. So, short story. We'll go with that. Anyways, that's where we'll end for today. We'll be moving on to the Call of Cthulhu next. Although I might have to go back and watch some of, what's his name? Vincent Price movies to see how they pronounce Cthulhu. Because they pronounce it differently than the modern take on it. And I figure a Vincent Price movie will be closer to the proper pronunciation. But anyways, thank you for listening. For some typical podcast business, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and rate and review wherever you're listening to this. Share it with your friends. You know, every podcaster's like, share and review and rate and review. It's because it makes us look better. It helps us get more people listening to us, because I really do truly appreciate the 6 of you that listen to me. But, you know, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and like episode 10, they're like, oh my gosh, I have so many downloads. And I'm like, I appreciate my bookworms, but it would be nice if there were more of you. And again, you can reach me via email at tocspod, phonetically, Tango, Oscar, Charlie, Sierra, Paris, Oscar, Delta, @gmail.com. On Facebook at Tangents on Cracked Spines Book Club, or with a voice message at anchor.fm/Tangents on Cracked Spines. The Facebook page will generally have our updates. Any updates and polls to vote on the next story. I am learning how to add those to Spotify, and obviously there's comments you can use on YouTube, because I'm getting caught up with YouTube. All of The Invisible Man is now on YouTube. So 2 of the books out of the 3 major ones I'm reading. Also, if you have a holiday that you would like me to cover, let me know, because I've been focusing on mine because it's what I know. And also, while I want to learn more about, like, Yom Kippur and, spread more about Passover and learn more about Rosh Hashanah and Ramadan. That was the one I was trying to think of. Ramadan and a whole slew of other things. If there's anything you would like me to try and cover on my, poetry / blessings type days, let me know. Because there's so many religions in the world. And if you're interested in merch, there's a few things on my Etsy shop. I will link it in the description, or at least try. And thank you all again for listening. Have a wonderful day. And be ready for Call of Cthulhu. I think I need pain meds. I was rambling a lot.